everyone's potential is unique. Only that individual really has an understanding of what makes them flourish, because only we as individuals have direct access to our own ideals and our own preferences. And only we as individuals know the gap in our mental model, like the room for growth.
Mm-hmm.
Only we know what we need to learn next.
Hello, and welcome back to the Hannah Frankman podcast. On today's episode, I'm speaking with Dan Sanchez. Dan is a distinguished senior fellow at FEE. He's been in charge of their content and publishing for years, and he's been a very important mentor of mine. I first worked with Dan years ago at Praxis when we were both part of the coaching team. And years later, I went through a fellowship at FEE called the Hazlitt Project, and Dan was my coach there as well. And this past year, he and I have had the chance to run a fellowship together called the Cole Summers Fellowship that you've perhaps heard me talk about on the show. So Dan and my professional lives have been very intertwined for years. But today I had Dan on the podcast to talk about his journey becoming an intellectual outside of academia, becoming a scholar not through college, but through his own independent studying and learning. We talk about his approach to developing fellowships and coaching programs inside of FEE and why he feels like writing is such an important mechanism to teach young people as part of their education and as their tools for thinking. I hope you enjoy this episode. Dan Sanchez, welcome to the podcast.
So great to be here.
I'm so excited about this. We are in the FEE studio where you have been working for the past 8 years, and where we first met. And I want to start this conversation by talking about how you came to be a writer in the liberty movement. I know this is a long and circuitous story, but I want to talk about all of it. Maybe we start with the big picture first, and then we dig more into the specifics of the story. But how did you end up here?
Sure. So I guess before being a writer, I was a reader. So I discovered libertarianism around 2005, 2006. And I kind of just wasn't aware that it was an option. Like I just thought, there are Republicans and Democrats and that I didn't know there was this whole separate philosophy. And so I just started hearing about free market arguments and it just instantly resonated with me. And then eventually I started discovering specifically Austrian economics, and that turned what was kind of like a general proclivity towards liberty into a new worldview, because Austrian economics, it kind of gives you a whole understanding of how society works, not just markets, but society. And it just completely shifted my view about justice and freedom and how societies can flourish. And so I just fell in love with the literature. So I just started reading ravenously, just like whole treatises. The Austrian School of Economics is big on treatises. So the most famous one is called Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. And so I read that, and I read Man, Economy, and State by Murray Rothbard. And a lot of these books were from one particular site, Mises.org. And in addition to selling these classic books, they also published articles. They had lectures on YouTube. And so that became my rabbit hole of an intellectual journey where I just wanted to learn about this school of economics and also this philosophy, because it wasn't just the economics, it was the philosophy of libertarianism. And so how that transitioned into writing really was in order to aid my reading. That, like, the reading, like, I was getting a lot out of it, but I didn't really feel like I had mastered it yet. And I felt like I needed to write out my understanding of it to really wrap my head around the ideas. And so basically what I started writing were like kind of study guides for myself, where, for example, I would be reading about like Mises's theory of knowledge. So Mises's epistemology. And I would be reading from different sources. So he's written about epistemology in multiple different books, and I would try to understand the passages about epistemology from all the books and then synthesize it into an article, kind of like as a study guide to this is Mises's epistemology, just to, again, to just wrap my head around it. And then what happened is that I would write these kinds of articles just on my blog, but then it got on the radar of the editor of Mises.org itself, and he reached out. This is Jeffrey Tucker at the Mises Institute, and he reached out and asked if he could publish one of my blog posts as an article. And then I was hooked, because then not only was I, able to teach myself by writing, but I was also able to hopefully help other people understand this too, and to sort of get feedback to see how well I actually understand this, by seeing how well people respond, like in comments to my articles and things like that.
What were you doing professionally at the time that you were doing all of this writing?
Yeah, at the time I was working at a science museum.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah.
What kind of science museum? Tell me more.
It's called the Lawrence Hall of Science. It's at UC Berkeley. It's named after a physicist. I think he was the inventor of the cyclotron as a particle accelerator. And it's a really neat museum. It's sort of the pioneer hands-on science education center. And so, a lot of science education is sort of like abstract and theoretical. And the philosophy at this museum was that kids learn about science through hands-on experience with materials and doing experiments themselves, and so it was a pretty fun job. It was kind of dangerous too. I've been bitten by a flying squirrel.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know this about you.
Yeah. Because we had a biology lab where we would teach kids about animals, and one day I was like cleaning up, and I saw this flying squirrel that had escaped, and it was like eating a cricket, and so I grabbed it, and then it just really bit into me.
Ouch!
And so, yeah. Let's see. I got shocked by a Jacob's ladder. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
It's like in the old Frankenstein movies where it's like an antenna, and then you see like the electricity go up, and
yeah.
In front of like this big assembly full of kids, I got too close to one of the contacts.
Oh no!
And like a 15,000 volt transformer just arced into me, and Yeah, so maybe hands-on science wasn't my calling because it was a bit too hands-on for me, and it needed something a little bit more abstract. But yeah, so I've always loved education. Like I've always loved explaining things. Like I didn't major in science, but I liked learning about it as an adult, and I liked sharing with kids to get them excited about it. And then while I was working there, like kind of on the side, I just developed this intellectual hobby. And eventually, I after getting published, and that led to various opportunities as an editor in that world, and as an educator in that world. And so then I switched from science education to economics education and libertarian political philosophy education.
You worked in a museum at UC Berkeley. You also attended UC Berkeley. You said you
Yes.
didn't major in science. What did you major in?
I majored in political science.
Okay.
Hmm.
I've heard you say that you retained almost nothing from your college education. Talk about this.
Yeah. So I've always been like I've always enjoyed the life of the mind, and I was kind of a bookish little boy,
Hmm.
and like in high school I enjoyed writing, but then um some over time I actually became less interested in reading and writing over the course of my scholastic career. And so even at a place like UC Berkeley, the reading and writing that I was doing, it was just a chore. Like I just did it because I had to, and it was just like a source of stress for me. And so I didn't really retain any of it. Like I just retained enough to do the assignment. I definitely wasn't passionate about it. Like I definitely wasn't interested
Hmm.
in it. It really wasn't until after I graduated my curiosity about the world first awakened. So after I graduated, I started um, subscribing to the New York Times because all of a sudden I was kind of like just interested in the news. And then I realized that when I was reading these news stories, that I had no context for them, that I didn't understand like the historical background. I didn't understand like right versus wrong about how to judge these conflicts that are going on around the world. And I realized that like I actually do care about the world. But and and I actually am interested in learning history and philosophy and about society. And so I started a sort of self-education project where it's like, okay, I want to teach myself history,
Hmm.
basically. And so I thought, okay, I'll just start from the beginning. The first civilization is ancient Sumer. And so I bought this book called Ancient Iraq, and I said, okay, I'll start from civilization. I'll work my way through the Egyptians and the ancient Greeks and the Romans, and I'll just work my way through history, and then like I'll finally like understand this world that I've i- inherited. And so then I became like a history buff, and so that was like I always say that I had to escape school to become a scholar because that's when my curiosity opened up, and that's where learning became an interest and not a chore.
Where do you think this curiosity came from? Because it's very common to talk to people who didn't enjoy school and associate all learning with that same sense of coerciveness and distastefulness, and they don't go on to be lifelong learners. And yet, in spite of the experience that you had in school, you were still going out and doing projects like this because you were hungry to learn. Why do you think that love of learning stayed intact?
I think just that it wasn't crowded out anymore because it's like I only have like so much capacity for processing written information.
Mm-hmm.
And so if that capacity is just taken up by things that I just have to do to go get through the program that I'm in, then there just isn't any energy left over for using it for any kind of curiosity. But then once that part of my brain was freed up, it just naturally gravitated to things that I was interested in.
So you were writing and publishing on your own blog, and then that blog was discovered by someone at Mises.org. Did you do anything to put it in front of people? Like, were you promoting it in any way, or was it a random discovery?
Well, it was actually on Mises.org
Oh, I see.
because they had this community blogging platform where
Oh,
like
I see.
anyone could create an account and start their own blog. And they also had like this forum software on Mises.org. And so what I would do is I would write blog posts on the blogging platform, and then I would share it on the forums to get feedback from other fans of Austrian economics, and to get like to see how well I understood these ideas, because there was this whole community of people who were doing the same thing I was doing, of just reading Mises and Rothbard and arguing about the finer points of Austrian economics, and so I was just participating in that, and Jeffrey Tucker was the one who started all that. Like, he was the editor of the website, but he also started these community things.
Okay.
And so he followed the community blogs, and so I just saw him in the comment field in one of the blog posts and that's where he asked if he could publish it.
Amazing. So then your pieces started getting published on Mises.org.
Mm-hmm.
What was the progression from there to taking on more of an editorial role and eventually your position at Fee?
Yeah. So basically, in the forum platform, Jeffrey posted that they want to start an online learning platform on the website where people could take online courses in Austrian economics. And so at that point, I was one of the moderators of the forum. And so he posted in the moderator private forum, like, we're looking for someone who would help launch this. And I always remember that I had kind of like this nemesis, another moderator who we like didn't get along. And I remember that, like, he replied first, and he asked, what would this entail? And then I replied next and gave a laundry list about exactly why I'm the perfect person for this job. And then, so the other guy didn't even get an answer to his question because I had already nailed the job. So, and I know that that's the kind of thing that, like, in Praxis, like, that's the kind of like go-getter attitude towards like value creation that you guys have taught. And so that's one reason why that message has always resonated with me, because it's like, if you want something, like, just put yourself out there and make the case for you being able to do it, even if you're not completely sure that you know how.
Yeah, it's surprising how frequently the world will respond in a positive manner when you do. It's easy to underestimate how hungry the world is for people to just tell you why they're going to be good at something so you can hire them already.
Yeah.
There are a couple things in this story that I love. I never realized how much of a side project this was for you at the beginning. I've never heard you talk about that part of the story, so this is very interesting. And I think there's so much about the experience that you had that carries over into the way you teach others in the work that you do. You're a writer, you're an editor, you have managed so much of the content output of Fee over the years. But really, like, you're an educator. mean, you work for the Foundation for Economic Education, whose audience, like target audience in large part, is young people. And you spent a lot of time thinking about how to educate people. You worked as a coach at Praxis. You've run various fellowship programs at FEE. And so much of what you teach is in the same spirit of this experience that you had of building something on the side and then eventually just following that passion until it turned into something that could sustain you as a career. Where did you start more explicitly getting into the education side of Liberty? Did that, like from the onset, was that a part of the work you were doing, or did that come a little bit later?
Well, originally I was just trying to educate myself through the articles. But then I like really got invested in whether my articles were helping other people learn too. And that's why that like the idea of starting an online course program in this was so attractive to me, because I wanted to give people a more systematic way of studying this. So instead of just like an assortment of articles, an actual syllabus of like, okay, read this one first and then this one next, and then like associated lectures of like where a professor is explaining where is like tying all the lessons of the articles together. And so that's really where it became more explicitly instructional. Was starting this online learning platform. And so I had never done this kind of thing before, so I just figured like, okay, well, how do you do an online course? Like we just did live weekly lectures, and then a reading list to read with every week, and a lesson for every week, and like a multiple choice quiz to test their understanding of what they heard and read. And so that was my first foray into instruction. But I realized that at some point that I wasn't teaching in the way that I myself learned, because I didn't just read and watch and answer multiple choice quizzes. Like, writing was a big part of it. And so I what it was really at FEE and with my work with Praxis, where I realized that I really need to challenge the students to be more creative in order to wrap their head around the ideas in the same way that I did.
Today's episode is brought to you by the John Galt Mortgage Company. Anybody who knows me well knows that I'm a fan of Ayn Rand's novels. And so I was incredibly excited when I found out my friends were starting a mortgage company named after John Galt. And I was even more excited when I found out what that mortgage company does. My friends Mitch and Tim have been working in the real estate world for years, and they realized over time that mortgages are way more expensive than they need to be. So they decided to start a new kind of mortgage, one that caps their profit on every transaction and passes the savings along to you, the buyer, in the form of a lower interest rate. I am not currently in the market for a house, but when I am, I will absolutely be working with Mitch and Tim as my lender. And if you are in the market for a house, you should absolutely check out what they're doing and get a quote for the rates that they can offer you. You can find their work at www.johngaltmortgage.com, or you can find a link to their site down in the show notes. Okay, back to the show. So I want to give a little bit of context for the next set of questions that I'm going to ask you, because there's a lot of backstory that you and I know that's important to understand for everything that we're going to talk about to make sense. So I did one of your fellowships 2 years ago, the Hazlitt Project. I was a Hazlitt fellow I did a 6-month program with you where we were being trained. There was a cohort of, was it 6 of us, I think?
Yeah.
6 of us.
Yeah.
And we were being trained in everything from like philosophy and economics and politics to how to write and publish with a publication, how to like really formulate strong arguments in our writing. We got media training. It was a very comprehensive program that we were put through. And you and I had worked together previously. I had published multiple pieces with Fee, so I'd worked with you as an editor, but I'd also worked alongside you as a coach at Praxis. So we had a lot of context. But I got to work with you very heavily inside of one of the programs you had designed and like feel what it felt like as a student to go through it. But we were recording this the day that we wrapped up a conference in Atlanta called Active Minds. That's an in-person experience, very similar to a lot of what we're about to talk about. It was a 3-day event for high school and college kids, teaching them about the ideas of individual rights and limited government, but with a very hands-on experiential component. And we'll get into the design of Active Minds in a little bit, but I'd love for you to break down how you think now about designing educational programs, because you do such a good job balancing the theoretical and the philosophical, which is also very important. You have to understand the philosophical side of anything that you're pursuing, but especially in the world of ideas, but then pairing that with the activities that actually allow someone to embody and work with the ideas that they're consuming, often in the form of writing and publishing. How do you think about that? Like, what are the things you are thinking about when you're designing a program?
Yeah. So what really changed my thinking about how to educate in economics and in the freedom philosophy was when my experience as an editor became more in a coaching approach. Because like previously when I was editing, like I would just receive submissions and then just publish them if they were good enough and just make some edits if they needed some fixes. But then at Fee was the first time where where I wasn't just taking submissions from outside writers. I actually had a team of writers. And so what that gave me the opportunity to do was to have writers who were kind of as students, where I was trying to help them become better writers, but also just better economists, like better at understanding these ideas that they're writing about. And so I got more experience with editing them in more detail, on coaching them on the ideas, like fixing misconceptions that they had, fixing misstatements that they had. So that was a big part of it. But then another big part of it was when I started working for Praxis. At one point, Isaac Morehouse, the founder of Praxis, reached out and asked me if I could run the writing module of Praxis. And what was great about Praxis is that it has this month of writing where you challenge the Praxis participants to blog every single day, and so it was this habit building thing of building the muscle of just clicking publish on something every day and articulating your thoughts on something every single day, and on learning out loud. The way you guys talk about learning out loud, building a portfolio that shows what you're learning about by articulating things in your own words. And so I started learning the Praxis way of doing things by running this writing module and coaching in the way that Isaac had coached. And it was also an introduction to the model of education that Praxis approaches, which is an apprenticeship model. It's learning not just for the abstract, but learning for a job and even on the job. And what the connection that I started to make was that I'd like to do something like Praxis at Fee. That I would like to see if we can have a apprenticeship program for economics writers, where people are learning the subject matter, but also learning the art of writing on the job to actually publish on uh, a website, like a real website, a professional website, like fee.org, and to see if that is a way to learn economics just as well as going, or even better than going to an undergraduate program in economics would be. And another source of inspiration for this was a figure who's associated with Fee named Henry Hazlitt. And because Henry Hazlitt, that's exactly how he became a great economist. That so Henry Hazlitt, he was a really intellectual child, like in the early 20th century. And he had dreams of becoming like an Ivy League scholar, an Ivy League philosopher. Um, but his dad died when he was very young, and his family couldn't afford for him to go to college, so he had to just start working. But he was still really fascinated in the world of ideas. So he thought, okay, if I have to work, like at least I want to do something in the world of ideas. So he got a job at the Wall Street Journal. And at first it was just like basically being a stenographer. And but eventually he got to try his hand at like writing short little pieces. And then he started teaching himself economics in order to do his job as a journalist better. And eventually, he taught himself economics so well that he wrote Economics in One Lesson, which is one of the absolute classics of economics education that has taught millions and millions of people about economics. And he became a great economist just through on the job research. He also he also kind of recruited his own faculty. So, like while he was doing economic journalism, he developed friendships with economists, and he would just go visit them in their office and just pick their brain. And so it was just like this free faculty, even though he never ended up going to college. Like he just recruited the faculty anyway, and then he created his own assignments by writing economic op-eds. He became the one of the main op-ed writers, editorial writers for the New York Times during the New Deal. He was one of the main voices against the New Deal, making the case for free market economics against the New Deal. And then it all culminated with Economics in One Lesson as his great masterpiece. And so I started this apprenticeship program called the Hazlitt Project to try to systematically produce that, like a program where young people can teach themselves to become economists and to become economics educators and communicators through publishing for the public, not in the cloistered ivory tower, but actually to learn out loud as they're studying economics themselves, and then learning how to master these ideas by communicating them to readers. And so that's how the fellowship program at Fee started.
I know it's been an iterative process between the first cohort and the most recent cohort that you've run in terms of refining the curriculum, refining the approach, really dialing in both the instructional style, but also the specific assignments that you're giving to the fellows going through the program. What has that process looked like?
Yeah. So let's see. In the first cohort, um, basically it was just asking them to just write articles and then just, editing them and just trying to coach them through it. But since then, I've learned new methods of writing education that I've adopted, and so there's this organization called the Institute for Excellence in Writing, and they have this method. Basically, it's the way Benjamin Franklin taught himself how to write. So Benjamin Franklin had this one particular magazine that he just loved, and he wanted to learn how to write in the style of this magazine. And so what he would do is that he would take a passage, what we call a source text, and then for every sentence he would just pick a few key words, and so he would make like a list, what we call a keyword outline of like maybe 3 keywords for each sentence. And then he would put the source text away. And then with the keyword outline, he would use the keywords to remind himself of the meaning of the source text and then rewrite that meaning in his own language and in his own words. And that is a really great method for 2 things: for teaching writing and for teaching the ideas themselves. Because a big hangup that a lot of especially young writers have with learning how to write is that you have to come up with what to say and how to say it. And it's hard enough just to figure out how to say something, but to expect to have like original ideas and like original insights and truth claims and stories and things like that, and figure out like how to express that, like that's why like the people just get stuck at the beginning, because it's just so complex. But if you provide them with the message and just challenge them to just put it in their own words, then it becomes easy enough where you can just get your reps in, and you can just, take a source text, do the keyword outline, rewrite it in your own words, boom, you've got some practice writing. Do that again the next day. And so it's a really effective way of learning how to write. It's also a really effective way of learning the ideas, because in order to get from the source text to the keyword outline to the rewrite, you have to internalize it. Like you can't just sort of like, have your eyes glaze over the text. Like you have to internalize it well enough so that you can actively recall it from just the keywords. And then by actively recalling it to write it out, it signals to your brain that like, okay, this is something I actually need, so I'm going to retain this. And so it's just a really great learning exercise. And so the Institute for Excellence in Writing, my daughter used this program because my daughter did this classical conversations, classical education program, and they use their IEW's materials both for writing instruction and for U.S. history instruction. So it's the U.S. history curriculum, but it's also a writing curriculum, and because they have source texts that tell the story of U.S. history, and so the kids are learning about history by using this exercise to write about history. So they're also learning writing. And so then my thought was like, okay, let's do that for economics. Let's give these fellows or apprentices source texts in like the basics of economics, and have them write their own versions of these things. And so it teaches them the economics itself, but also how to write economics.
How do you approach the iterative process of working with a group of students and then seeing what's working in real time and then adjusting course accordingly, because it's something you're very good at. You do this very nimbly. And I'm really curious how you think about that, or like what some of the biggest things are that you're looking for as you're thinking about continuing to refine something. Sometimes even like while you're working with individual students and you're tailoring a curriculum to the individuals within it, or thinking about like a future cohort and tweaks that you want to make.
Yeah, it's just trial and error of just seeing where people are getting hung up on something, and then just trying to figure out like a better way to do it. So for example, like with this iterative process where like I was just having them write about like whatever, um, you know, there was just a hang up where they would just get stuck because it was just too complex, because I was asking them to come up with like these original insights, and it was just, too challenging. And um, so then I thought like, okay, how do I fix that? And just sort of like just being open to other methods. And Yeah, I just remembered it just so happened that my sister is friends with the founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing.
Ah.
And so I actually had lunch with him one time, like maybe like 20 years ago or something like that. And so I've always kind of been just vaguely aware of it, but then especially like as I had my own daughter and I started getting her into classical education, and then I re-encountered this method, and so I just made the connection of like, oh, that's the missing piece. Like that's what I need to fix this problem in the program.
Let's talk about Active Minds, the conference that you just put on. Um, can you walk us through the curriculum that you designed? Because it was phenomenal.
Thank you. Yeah, well, you're a big part of the curriculum. You were the MC, and you have been developing further fellowship programs with me at Fee that really informed this curriculum. And so basically, the way the conference went is that you had the first um, the opening speech, and your talk was about letting curiosity be your compass, and so that really encouraged the students to be curious and to be expressive, so that when they go through the program, that they're not just passively receiving, that they feel like they don't need permission to express themselves and to explore these ideas. And so that was the beginning. And then the next day we started with a theoretical lecture where I gave a lecture about individual rights. And so just presenting like the basic ideas of individual rights, and then in my presentation I referenced certain classic texts that really explain individual rights. So I referenced the Declaration of Independence, and John Locke's two treatises of government, and an essay by Ayn Rand on rights. And then we did an application talk of that, where another speaker spoke about, okay, now you know the theory of rights. And Angel Walker Worth gave a presentation on dystopian young adult fiction, and about these fictional worlds without rights, and so painted a picture of what life. Well, she wouldn't say without rights, but where rights aren't recognized, because the rights are there, but they're not recognized. But what life is like when people's rights are not respected. And so that and the idea there is that because with young people, they like young adult fiction, and it makes these questions about freedom and slavery and rights and violations like vivid, like with uh, persona dramatis, like characters, and so to make it like more vivid and real for them. And then after they get like the theory and the application, then we challenge them to actually read and write about these ideas. And so then we had them do the keyword outline exercise on a passage from an Ayn Rand essay. And we selected a passage that really got at the kernel about what rights are, and challenge them to study the source text, to do the keyword outline, to think back to the talks that they had just listened and tried to internalize it, and then either speak or write or both in their own language these ideas, in order to actually externalize it. And then we also had exercises where then they would have discussions with each other, where they would apply these ideas to debates of like, should there be a right to 3 square meals a day? Like, that's not what the founders that's not what the Declaration of Independence conceived of as rights, but that's what Franklin Delano Roosevelt conceived of as rights. Like, where do you stand on that? And then having a discussion about that, and articulating your case for that, and again, sort of like this active recall of whatever their position on that is. If they can articulate it and defend it in a civil discussion with other students, then they're going to learn it better. And so that was basically the pattern that we did for a couple different lessons. So we did one on individual rights, and then we did one on limited government, and I think it worked.
One of the things that I loved about the curriculum that you designed for this is the fact that you encompassed so much of the learning journey into such a short amount of time, because this is the process that one goes through to master a topic. And it's the process that you went through in your own journey. You went to college, remember very little about it, besides the fact that you didn't terribly enjoy it. But then you became a scholar independent of any academic institution bestowing the knowledge upon you. You went out and you got it yourself through the process of reading and listening, and then speaking and writing and talking about ideas and articulating them into written content and publishing it, and then having discussions and getting feedback around it and continuing to refine your thoughts. And you showed the attendees at this conference the entire process of that 2 rounds over the course of a day. And it was very thorough. It's not like you were just getting like, toe dipped in the water. They were hearing complex lectures about things, and then reading source texts, and then doing the writing and doing the speaking, and seeing the spirit of curiosity embodied for them in the speakers who were having discussions amongst themselves and not always agreeing with each other. Like, they were seeing the culture modeled and then practicing it in real time, which it's so powerful for people to learn that experientially. And that's so transformative. Like, you had to figure this out over the course of, it sounds like, years of reading and writing and exploring ideas independently. But it doesn't have to take years. It will always take years to develop your thoughts about something. Like, it's a lifelong journey, but it doesn't have to take years to learn the process itself. And I think you designed something that really does instill and in an experiential way, the approach very quickly, which I know has been refined over the years of running fellowships. we haven't talked about the Cole Summers Fellowship yet, which is the fellowship you referenced earlier that you and I have been working on together at FEE, which it's been such a delight and such an honor to get to work on this with you. Um, can you tell the story of how the Cole Summers Fellowship came to be for those who are not yet familiar?
Sure. Yeah. So one of my colleagues at FEE is Carrie McDonald, who you've had on your podcast,
Yes.
and she is the premier documenter of the education freedom movement in the world right now. So she wrote a book called Unschooled that explained unschooling and the unschooling movement. And she, especially since the COVID pandemic, has been documenting the mass exodus from the public school system after the revelations that came about around COVID, where Zoom school uh, parents realized how poorly their children were being educated because they could see it on the screen, and and also just like all sorts of like political agendas getting injected into the classroom. That just this mass disaffection with the system, the public school system, and a lot of people just pulled their kids out and started doing homeschooling. Also started doing microschooling. Like even teachers left the school system and they started their own little microschool programs with completely different approaches to education. And what we started to see was like an actual market in learning developing. And so Carrie has been just really writing lots of articles for FEE. She has a great podcast called Liberated Podcast. She has a Liberated newsletter. She interviews founders like you do on your podcast, and so she had this idea for young people who themselves are going through an alternative learning journey themselves and who would like to talk about their own journey, like a program like the Hazlitt Project program, but teaching those kids how to tell their own story, and talk about their own learning journey, and for them to learn out loud through writing and content creation in general. And so when she pitched that, like, I instantly thought of you because I thought you would be the perfect person to run this, because that's what you've done for yourself. That, like, when you went through the Hazlitt Project, and very shortly after that you built your own audience, and you blew up on Twitter talking about alternative education on Twitter. You started your podcast, which blew up. You started Rebel Educator, that is really influential and really helping so many parents and their kids finding alternative paths to education. And a big part of how you were doing that was just like learning out loud yourself and just following your curiosity. And I I just knew that you would be the perfect person to coach kids to learn how to do that themselves. And um and then we named it after Cole Summers, whose real name was Kevin Cooper, because he was doing that himself as a 14-year-old, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he was building a huge following on Twitter, and he wrote an autobiography about his homeschooling journey and how he learned to become an entrepreneur and became a great entrepreneur. And so tragically he died in an accident. And so I thought, you know, what what better way to honor his legacy and what he was building than to teach kids how to do what he was doing. And yeah, and so thankfully you were available, and we started this program, and we had just an amazing first cohort. We also hired our friend and colleague from Praxis, Lola Algier, who herself is an expert in copywriting, but also particularly in the keyword outlining method, because she did that as a homeschooler herself. And so the two of you have taught this cohort of really impressive young writers how to learn out loud, how to use the keyword outline method to develop as a writer, and to develop as a thinker, and to build an audience, and to follow their curiosity. And so that was just a huge success. And a lot of what we learned in developing that program, we plugged it straight into this Active Minds conference, to see if we could do it in an in-person event. And again, like, just judging from the reception of the kids, of how the questions that they asked, there were so many comments about like how much they enjoyed the writing exercise, and how it really got them into the ideas, just the way that they articulated their cases to their ideas to each other in the discussions. Like, the method seems to really work. And so I'm just, really excited about that, and really thankful to you for helping make that happen.
It's been such a delight. I have to ask, why is this the work for you? Why is this the thing that you've chosen to spend your life doing, educating kids in the ideas of liberty and in the art of writing, and supporting writers in their publishing endeavors? Why is this your calling?
I think I've always had a love of truth in general, and and I I, I really like to see human potential unleashed, especially for young people, because I mean, I guess part of it might be feeling like so much of my own childhood was wasted in the school system, and just thinking of how much more faster I could have grown as a person, and as a student of the world, if I had like better approaches um learning. I you know Also, just understanding freedom and economics, and just like understanding how much of just the frustration of human potential that's going on in the world is because of a misunderstanding of the importance of individual rights, and of limited government and free markets. And just wanting to be of service, and just knowing that, like, really the only way that we can get to a free society is if, on an individual level, people understand the ideas of liberty well enough to actually embrace them. And I think that it's powerful for society, but also just like on an individual level, of just unlocking people's potential by giving them permission to really explore their curiosity, and to learn out loud and to grow as a person, to learn more effectively. That in both ways, I just want to help um, young people unlock their potential in that way. And a big influence on this is the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, Leonard E. Reed, because his whole philosophy of education, and particularly educating liberty, is really influential about all these techniques that I've been developing. And that is ultimately, he taught that the only way that you can improve other people and improve the world is through self-improvement. That it by focusing on self-improvement, and so in the case of learning, that means in the case of education, focusing on your own learning, that 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 is that the best thing that you can do is inspire someone else to share in your learning. You can't like impose the knowledge on them. And so really, he taught that the way to teach people is to learn out loud. And learn out loud is, I think, was it Isaac Morehouse that came up with, or T.K. Coleman that came up with it?
I first heard it from them. I don't know if it was their own coined term or if it came from somewhere else originally. I actually don't know the etymology of the phrase. It's just become part of the lexicon of so many people we know because it's such a good way of describing the phenomenon of sharing what you're learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, but he didn't, Leonard Reed didn't use that phrase, but that's exactly what he was talking about. And so, like, I would just like to learn these ideas and become a better person myself, like both in terms of just my like basic character, but also just making sure that I'm a good citizen of the world, that I respect other people's rights, and that I understand rights and I understand freedom. And I think that in trying to learn that myself, and if I learn out loud, that can help other people be inspired to learn out loud too. And so that's really the hope. And so like in and because it really like makes a difference, that I always find when I start getting too like into like teacherly mode, and I'm trying to like correct people's misconceptions, I can feel them tuning me out. But when I'm just like exploring something that I'm trying to wrap my head around, and just trying to to hammer these thoughts into shape through words in front of people, or on the page, that's when people start really vibing with what I'm saying and start following along and wanting to join me in that journey. And so and I just think that this approach is just like really not recognized as the way that people learn. And so I'm hoping that through these programs that we're developing, that we can demonstrate that this is the way that people learn, and more people will learn.
It certainly worked for me, the Hazlitt Fellowship, and also working with you for years. As an editor, I owe you a very big thank you, because working with you has been extremely influential in the way that I think about the trajectory of my own intellect and my own career. I want to take this one step deeper. You've talked a lot about the importance of teaching young people the ideas of liberty, and of that being going in tandem with the expression of their potential. Why the philosophy of liberty? Can we go one step deeper? Like, what is the short version of your case for why individualism and liberty are so important?
Sure. Yeah. To really achieve one's potential, like everyone's potential is unique. And only that individual really has an understanding of what makes them flourish, because only we as individuals have direct access to our own ideals and our own preferences. And only we as individuals know the gap in our mental model, like the room for growth.
Mm-hmm.
That we have these ideals, and we have these desires to become more of ourselves, but only we know what we need to learn next. Like, someone else can't know that for us. That's why I think that the education model of like one size fits all education of like, okay, now this is the time to learn this, and then this is the time to learn this. You can't know that because you don't know where the student is in their learning journey. And so ultimately, really flourishing, it requires autonomy, and you can only have that autonomy if you have rights. Like, at the most basic level, if you have the exclusive ownership of your own person, of your own body, that you're not like forced to go to a school and learn something that you're not interested in. And but also that if you have access to resources that are your own, that children and families need to be able to dispose of their own resources in order to get the most value out of them. If it's public property, like school property, and they don't really have a say over like how to use it, then it's there's too much information asymmetry, because it's these central planners trying to work out like what is the best use of resources for these individuals who, again, they just are not in their head, like they don't know what they need. And so just in general, people are better when they are able to use their local knowledge and their unique preferences to dispose of the resources that they have available to them, and that they're able to make trades of resources with other people in voluntary cooperation, because then those people, they know what they need and want, and so then the two people can make mutually beneficial exchanges. And then you don't have that information asymmetry, because then everybody is working directly with what they know most about, instead of like this distant overlord trying to just do guesswork about things that they just don't know. And so just in general, free people are just more nimble and capable, and are able to cooperate more effectively to flourish as best as they can.
Dan, it's been such a pleasure to get to interview you today. Thank you so much for taking the time for this.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too.
All right, my friends, that is a wrap for today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found this valuable. Please leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Please like the video on YouTube. And please don't forget to subscribe on whatever platform you listen to make sure that you don't miss next week's episode. Thank you so much, friends. I will see you next week.